Hello everyone, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today we are going to be talking about one of my most anticipated movies for 2025 that came out this week or this month, depending on when you're watching this video, and that is Marvel's Thunderbolts. I have been looking forward to the Thunderbolts ever since the lineup was announced at D23 back in 2022. It has been very serious for me for many years now, and I got to see it a couple days ago, and I want to talk about it. Now, this review is going to have spoilers in it. Not necessarily like every single spoiler in the movie, but we are going to be talking about like the plot in depth, and we're going to be talking about the fight scenes and the characters and all that stuff. So, if you haven't seen Thunderbolts yet, go watch it in theaters. Save this video and then come back and watch it after you see it. Or if you don't care about spoilers, then keep watching. I don't care. But I don't really do reviews of movies all that often on my channel. So I have decided to divide this video up into segments. That's how I love to do a lot of my videos. They always have to have like little sections. So like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the plot. We are also going to talk about like the themes and the messaging within this movie. We're going to talk about the fight scenes and the action scenes that happen in it. We're going to talk about the entertainment value of the film. Was it fun to watch? Is it rewatchable? Stuff like that. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about the characters of the movie, and then I'll sort of sum up all my thoughts at the end. So without further ado, let's get into the first thing I want to talk about, which is the plot of Thunderbolts. So the general plot of this movie that we knew going into it was just like a team of anti-heroes, somehow all tied to Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, are tasked with tying up Val's loose ends, specifically with her Sentry program, because all of these loose ends are like key components in the impeachment of Valentina. But these anti-heroes soon realize that they themselves are loose ends for Valentina, so they team up to fight against Val, while also battling their own demons, if you will. I think we all sort of kind of knew what movie that we were going to be watching based on all the marketing for this movie. I felt like more or less the marketing was pretty accurate, and I feel like that is an important thing to note because for me personally, sometimes I feel like Marvel does this thing where at least the first trailer that they drop for a movie or a TV show is really good. It's a really good trailer, and then the project is nothing like the trailer that they put out. It just doesn't, it's not the same feeling. It's not the same vibe. I feel like that happens a lot when it comes to Marvel, but I do think that the advertising and the promo for Thunderbolts very accurately depicted like what exactly we were going to see, which isn't a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. Like we knew immediately based off the promo that we were going to get a whole bunch of anti-heroes sort of coming together and forming a team. This movie was even referenced like plenty of times by fans as Marvel's Suicide Squad. So, and we also knew that this movie was going to be introducing a new character to us named Bob or Sentry or the Void, whatever you want to call him. Honestly, his character is still a little confusing to me, but we'll get into that later. Now, I do have like an in-depth sort of rough outline of the plot that I'm going to run through really quick in case you don't remember or you haven't seen the movie yet and you just don't care about spoilers, whatever the case may be. Here's like a rough outline of the plot of the movie. So the movie opens up with Yelena. She's like on top of a really tall building, and there's a voiceover talking about how lonely and depressed she is. We find out that in the years that we haven't seen Yelena, she somehow ended up working for Valentina. She kind of works for her behind the scenes. No one really knows that she's doing it. And we specifically see Yelena help destroy an Oxcorp lab that was helping with research for the Sentry program, which we'll get into in a second. Side note, really quick, one small kind of issue I have with the movie, it's so small and minute. I really hate that the name for this lab / company that they came up with was Oxcorp, because as somebody who is like partially deaf, I have really bad hearing. For half of the movie, until I saw it written out in words, I thought they were saying Oscorp, which is the company that is like owned and operated by Norman Osborn in the Spider-Man movies. So I was like, are we introducing Norman Osborn this casually into Marvel or something? No, I just couldn't hear because Oxcorp and Oscorp are virtually almost the exact same sounding word. They couldn't have come up with any other name for the corporation. That's just my one small side note. Anyways, back to the plot of the movie. We go a lot more in depth with Yelena's feelings of loneliness and depression when she goes to visit her father, Alexei. And I think this is like the first time they had seen each other in a year. We do learn eventually that this Sentry program was essentially a series of experiments conducted on subjects not too far off from like the way that Hydra sort of attempted to create a whole bunch of super soldiers. So the vibes are kind of icky right off the bat. However, the Sentry program is pretty much a failure because all of the test subjects keep dying. All of these human beings that they keep running tests on are dying. The serum or whatever you want to call it that they inject them with for the Sentry program is just straight up not working, and all these people are dying. So Valentina is being impeached from, I believe, her position as director of the CIA in this movie because of the suspicion that she is involved with Oxcorp and this weird shady stuff, which she is, but that's where our other characters come in. The character of Bucky comes in at the impeachment of it all because Bucky is now a congressman in the MCU, and he is involved with wanting to get Valentina impeached. He is not on her side. But eventually, later on in the movie, he realizes that the best way to help get Valentina impeached is probably not necessarily to go through the government or the system, if you will. And so he takes matters into his own hands. As for our other characters, Yelena, Ghost, Taskmaster, John Walker, they all come into the picture when it comes to Valentina and the fact that she is involved with Oxcorp and she needs to get rid of all this evidence that she is involved. Because if she doesn't get rid of it, she will be impeached. So Yelena, Ghost, Taskmaster, and John Walker, they are all tasked with tying up Valentina's loose ends, if you will. But like I mentioned earlier, the tides change when the four of these characters realize that they are also Valentina's loose ends, and Valentina is trying to get them killed in the process. Essentially, Val used them all to put a hit on each other. Yelena is there to kill Ghost. Ghost is there to kill Taskmaster. Taskmaster is there to kill John Walker, and John Walker is there to kill Yelena. So everyone's trying to kill everybody. Because as long as these characters are all alive, they all know what Valentina has been up to and all the stuff that Valentina has done, and they could hypothetically testify against her in her impeachment and help get her impeached. That's like the catalyst of the plot of this movie. So Valentina has all of these characters sort of locked in a vault, and she plans to set them and a whole bunch of other Oxcorp evidence on fire. Thankfully, Bob is there to save the day. All of these characters have to work together to get out of the vault. And since this is the first time we're seeing this group of characters attempt to work together, it's honestly very endearing. I think their dynamic works really, really well straight off the bat. And of course, I'll talk more about the character dynamics in a different section of this video. But after a couple fight scenes, the group of anti-heroes get out of the vault and they sneak past Valentina. At least everybody does except for Bob. Valentina takes Bob with her to New York, where she now takes over the Avengers Tower. Meanwhile, Red Guardian and his limo service pick up the rest of the Thunderbolts in the middle of the desert to help get them out. As the Thunderbolts are trying to escape in Alexei's limo, a convoy appears behind them, which is just like a bunch of military trucks. And the one and only Bucky Barnes appears to take out the trucks one by one, and in a very sexy way, might I add. Bucky attacks the limo that the Thunderbolts are in. He ties them up and he says, I'm going to take you guys to Congress. You guys are witnesses. You're going to testify against Valentina. We got to get her impeached. But then Bucky's mind is changed when the Thunderbolts are like trying to warn him about Bob / Sentry, I guess, and what he can do. And then Bucky's mind is super changed when he gets a phone call from Mel, who is Valentina's assistant. And Mel is like, dude, Valentina's lost it. She's lost the plot. She's off the rails. So then Bucky's plans change. The team heads to the Avengers Tower, where Valentina is upstairs waiting for them with Bob. Or at this point now, I think he is like fully considered Sentry. The Thunderbolts then attempt to fight Sentry, and it is just an absolute shit show for everyone. Like, it is truly embarrassing. They literally end up running away because Sentry is so insanely overpowered. Like, it's bad. However, in this fight scene, there is a moment where Bucky unzips and takes off his jacket, and I did cheer for that. When the Thunderbolts leave the tower, Sentry then kind of turns on Valentina because he's like, I don't need to take orders from you. Valentina doesn't like that, and she triggers the kill switch. Or technically Mel does, but they kill Sentry. He's dead on the floor. Or so we thought. But then, when they leave him and his dead body on the floor, a darkness just slowly takes over Sentry, and he has now become the Void. The Void flies out of the Avengers Tower and he starts immediately terrorizing the streets of New York. He makes a helicopter fall from the sky, causing like mass damage to the streets. We get to see the Thunderbolts work together again as they protect the citizens of New York from all of like this flying debris and flying cars and all this stuff. And I did really like this moment because it was just a really beautiful example of them working together as a team, which I think is always good to see because I do think that these characters work really well together, both in terms of like humor, but also in terms of working together as heroes, if you will. The Void starts to just fully lay his darkness across the streets of New York, and then everybody on the streets, including the Thunderbolts, start to run. They're like running into the subway or something, trying to hide from the darkness. At least everybody is except for Yelena. Yelena just walks right towards it and fully steps into the Void. When Yelena steps directly into the darkness, we see her have to be confronted with a few horrible memories of her time in the Red Room. We also see her confront what seems to be like a present day Yelena, sort of like the Yelena we meet at the beginning of the film, who is struggling with all of this depression and loneliness. And through all of these memories, Yelena manages to find Bob, and she makes it to the room that he's in. Yelena and Bob have a very beautiful moment on the floor of Bob's attic, but then the room starts like caving in on them. It kind of starts attacking them. It's like throwing chairs at them. But then the two of them are saved by the rest of the Thunderbolts, who seemingly also decided to go and step into the Void so they could find Yelena and Bob and get them out. As a team, they travel to a couple of Bob's worst memories, but one of the worst memories for Bob is when his Sentry testing began and they all come face to face with the Void. Which, by the way, the Void is a very, very fun and unique character design. He was very creepy because you kind of only just see his eyes, and I really liked it. So I just wanted to shout out to that character design in the movie. But so all of our characters are face to face with the Void. Bob starts to fight the Void because the rest of the Thunderbolts are like tied up in the back. It's a whole thing. Bob sort of struggles at first, but then he's able to overpower the Void and he's got him on the ground and he's just punching the shit out of the Void's face. And unfortunately, that is exactly what the Void wants. He wants Bob to let the darkness take over him. The Void's shadow starts creeping up Bob's body. And so Yelena and the rest of the team, they break free from their restraints and they go and they help pull Bob off of the Void. They pull him back. They pull him away from the darkness. And because of this, the team escapes the Void along with Bob, and the darkness that had spread across New York starts to disappear, and it returns all the citizens to the street. The Thunderbolts then move in on Valentina once everything's back to normal because they want to like arrest her or whatever. And Val actually tricks them into walking straight out into a press conference where she announces that they are the new Avengers. She's like, I've been working on this for a while, and this is the project I've been working on. Welcome to your new Avengers. And then that's kind of where the movie ends. I think that the plot for this movie works really well. I think it's concise. I think it's good. Like, I think it's a very straightforward plot, which I don't ever think is a bad thing. It does sort of leave off on like a cliffhanger, and that can cause it to feel like the movie sort of is left unfinished. Because the thing with cliffhangers is like, cliffhangers normally make you just want to watch more. That's the thing. So like when you leave a movie off of the cliffhanger and you're not going to have another movie come out within like pretty much the next year, like Wicked Part 1 leaves off on a cliffhanger kind of, if you will. But we know Wicked Part 2 is coming out this year. It's not like there's going to be a Part 2 to Thunderbolts or anything. We just have to wait for like, I think Doomsday. That's the next time we're going to see these characters. So the cliffhanger can kind of leave you with the feeling of like, that's the end. I feel like, there could have been maybe like 15 more minutes of the movie, but also at the same time, I do think that it is a really interesting and enticing ending to the film. So I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I don't hate it, but it does make me kind of be like, that's it? Damn. Moving on to the next segment I want to talk about the themes and messaging within this film. The overall theming of this movie does tackle really dark topics like loneliness and depression and borderline suicide at times. The type of characters that team up in this lineup of Thunderbolts, they all have their own varying levels of trauma, and the movie tackles the sort of darkness and depression that comes along with trauma like that. However, personally, I feel like the movie could have taken it a step or a couple steps further with the messaging. Like, yes, this is really the first time that a Marvel movie has genuinely sort of confronted things like depression and trauma and PTSD, but it still almost felt like a little surface level. So for context, Bob's powers as the Void sort of allows people who touch him or touch his darkness to enter their own darkest places. So within like the first 2 acts of the film, Yelena, John Walker, and Val all end up touching Bob's hand at one point. And then those characters enter a sort of reliving of their darkest moments. For Yelena, the first memory we see of her is of her first test in the Red Room, which is essentially her having, I guess, to just trick some girl into being killed. For John, he sees the moment that his wife decided to leave him and take his kid away from him. And for Valentina, we see her as a little girl witness her dad get shot right in front of her. Later in the movie, when Bob is like fully taken over by the Void and Yelena steps into the Void willingly, she is met with more memories. She's stuck reliving the memory of her first Red Room test for a while until she like sort of breaks through a wall and makes it into another memory. Her second memory is another brutal Red Room memory where she completes a task before the rest of her class does, and then she has to watch the rest of her class get like whipped. And then her third memory is like a more recent one. She has to fight like a present day version of Yelena, who is clearly the side of Yelena that is struggling with like depression and alcoholism and all of that stuff. So clearly Yelena is the main character of this movie, and absolutely as she should be. I think that she is an incredible character, and I think that she carries this movie so incredibly well. So it makes sense that Yelena would be the character to explore the very dark and emotional themes of this movie the most out of all of our Thunderbolts characters. However, like I said earlier, I do wish the movie went a little bit harder on this theme with like all of its characters, because literally the main appeal of this Thunderbolts lineup is that they're all loners. They all have trauma, and they all have deep, dark moments from their past. For example, selfishly, I wanted this movie to dive a little into Bucky's trauma and past. Now, massive disclaimer, in case you don't know this about me, which you might not, I am a massive, huge, gigantic Bucky Barnes fan. Bucky is without a doubt my favorite character in the MCU. So, it is worth noting that I have a very strong bias towards him and any project that he's in. It's as simple as that. However, one of the main reasons that Bucky is my favorite MCU character is because I think that he is such a beautifully complex and deep character, regardless of the fact that Marvel continues to sideline him in every single project that he's involved in. But because Bucky is so complex and is full of a very dark and emotional past, specifically with his time as the Winter Soldier, but not even to mention his time as a literal war hero, and you would think that this movie would be the perfect opportunity for Marvel to explore the nuances of Bucky's character, but they just absolutely don't. I guess maybe Marvel thinks they've touched enough on Bucky's time as the Winter Soldier with his 12 minutes of screen time in Captain America the Winter Soldier. So, you know, maybe that's what it is. But beyond just Bucky and what I wanted to see on a personal level, I still think it would have been really cool to see at least one sort of dark, traumatizing memory from each member of the Thunderbolts. I think it could have been pretty impactful to see these memories as the team makes their way through the Void to find Yelena and Bob at the very end of the film. I think for the entire team to witness one traumatizing memory for each member of the team, I think that could have been really moving, and also I think it would have done a lot to really solidify this group as a team, because hey, nothing works quite like trauma bonding. You know what I mean? But, you know, this team, they barely know each other. They're all kind of strangers. And that's kind of the beauty of them forming a team. And I just think that if they got to experience each other's trauma while maneuvering through the Void, I just think that that would have done a lot to make them all care about each other. And also I think it would have done a lot for the audience to make us care about these characters even more, just one step further. Considering Yelena and Alexei are very much like the main emotional tether of this movie, I think it could have added another level of emotion if we got to see something dark from Alexei's past. Maybe something like his perspective of the day that he lost Yelena and Natasha to the Red Room. That could have been such an insanely emotional moment. Like, genuinely. For Ghost, a character who is pretty underutilized in this movie, but at the same time, I think she's used, like, just the right amount that she needs to be used, if that makes sense. But regardless, I think that her character could have benefited from just like one flashback of seeing a younger Ava stuck in a lab being experimented on. That could have done so much for her character and for the audience. Like I mentioned earlier, we did get a small moment of a John Walker memory where his wife decides to leave him. But I feel like I would have liked to explore a different or just another memory for John. Like maybe him dealing with the aftermath of the Falcon Winter Soldier and like his best friend being dead, he murdered somebody, losing the title of Captain America, how he has to deal with that, or even more specifically, maybe even his time in Afghanistan, which he literally says in The Falcon Winter Soldier is like the darkest time of his life. So I feel like that would have made sense to explore that for him. And it could have been emotional. He could have seen his best friend again alive in the flashback. Oh, guys, come on. So like overall, I do think that the dark themes in this movie work really well. And I do think that the fact that they tackle things like depression does make this movie sort of stand out from other Marvel movies. But in retrospect, I feel like the way that they tackled these dark topics, it was just barely below surface level. It's like they just scratched a little bit at the dirt and that was it. I feel like they could have done so much more. And I feel like it's rare for a Marvel movie to tackle serious or dark topics like this. That's why I have an issue with whenever someone's like, oh, making The Falcon Winter Soldier a TV show instead of a movie was a giant mistake. I couldn't disagree with the statement more, because if you think that they would have spent time in a movie tackling both a black man becoming Captain America and Bucky's trauma and him going to therapy and all that stuff, and the two of them coming together and like reconciling and all that jazz, if you think any of that would have like accurately made it into a movie, I very much disagree. I think The Falcon Winter Soldier works perfectly as a TV show because they have like 6 hours. 5 hours. They have like 5 hours to unpack all this stuff. Stuff that Marvel movies don't normally unpack. But that does it for like the themes and the messaging in this movie. Now I want to move into talking about the fight scenes and the action scenes. So a mini fight scene that the movie opens up with is Yelena sort of having this cool sort of hallway fight scene. It's like an aerial shot of Yelena in a hallway taking down a whole bunch of agents. But one thing about this scene that really stood out to me, and the reason I want to talk about it, is the cinematography and how it was shot. The light from the door where Yelena comes in from casts a shadow behind all of the agents that she's fighting, and the shadows look identical to the way that the Void turns people into shadows later on in the film. And I just thought that was a beautiful little piece of foreshadowing. So 10 out of 10, no notes on that one. The next fight scene we have is the John versus Ghost versus Taskmaster versus Yelena fight in the vault. I think that this is easily the best fight scene of the film. There aren't too many fight scenes, honestly, but I do think that this is easily the best fight scene. It was so cool to see these characters fight each other and fight each other's powers. And it did a really great job at highlighting something that I actually had a pretty big issue with. So, side rant. Get ready. Back in 2022, when this Thunderbolts lineup was announced at D23, I remember so many people taking to Twitter and complaining about the lineup, saying that it sucked, saying that it was ass, saying that it was just a bunch of super soldiers and that that's so boring, and all of these characters just punch and shoot things and it's a bad lineup, basically complaining that there's nobody on the team that has powers. And I personally had such an issue with people saying this as somebody who loves the grounded side of the MCU way more than the magical side of the MCU. I had an issue with this because reducing all of these characters to just characters that punch is doing such a disservice to the street level side of this universe. Putting characters like Yelena and John Walker side by side and saying that they fight in the exact same way is literally an insane statement to me. I'm sorry. If you think that, you're so wrong, it's not even funny. Yelena has Red Room training, a brutal Soviet-Russian training program that trains little girls at a very young age and turns them into these crazy assassin spies. John Walker has a very long history of military training. He spent a lot of years in the US Army, and he has experience in leading missions that involve like counterterrorism and hostage rescue. And also now John has the super soldier serum, which adds like super strength to his fighting abilities. My point is, a military trained army veteran does not fight in the same way as a Soviet Russian assassin spy. Not at all. They fight completely different. And it is very evident and obvious in this fight scene that happens in the vault in this movie. And I loved it. So this fight scene at the beginning of the film made me really happy because I think it beautifully highlighted the different ways that these characters fight and defend themselves. So once again, 10 out of 10 for that fight scene, if you will. Then almost sort of immediately after this, we have another sort of mini fight scene, I guess is what I would classify it as. And I'm going to call it Thunderbolts versus SWAT. Essentially, it's just like the Thunderbolts trying to make their way out of the vault and make their way past a bunch of agents. John Walker takes out a whole wave of agents on his own, but that happens off camera, so we don't actually see it. Then Yelena and Bob team up in a very endearing and hilarious way as Yelena takes out the second wave of agents trying to kill them. This fight scene is almost directly after the fight scene in the vault, so it is kind of a step down from that fight scene, but it's still very entertaining. I give it 7 out of 10. Then we have more of an action scene rather than a fight scene, but we have Bucky versus the convoy, I guess. When the Thunderbolts are picked up by Alexei in his limo service, a convoy of like military trucks is chasing them, and then Bucky comes in and takes them out one by one on his motorcycle. And like I said, this is definitely more of an action sequence than a fight scene. And I know, I do have Bucky bias, but I do think that this scene is also a standout action sequence within the entire film. Bucky is just so cool. And he is so badass. And then you put him on a motorcycle and he just becomes 10 times more cool than he already was. I love him. I also love when Marvel truly lets Bucky show off his fighting ability and his strength, especially with his metal arm. And I think that this scene was like a very perfect display of that. It's one of the best displays, I think, of Bucky's strength and fighting abilities that we've gotten in a while. I give it 11 out of 10 because I love Bucky on a motorcycle. Then we have the Thunderbolts breaking into Avengers Tower, where again, they just attack a whole bunch of agents. This is a really, really short fight scene, and it's like a miniature version / continuation of the fight scene that happens in the vault earlier on in the film, except instead of all of these characters fighting against each other, we now get to see them using their different powers together and work together to fight a whole bunch of agents, which I really liked. There are a few very interesting moments and like character standout moments within this fight scene, but it's cut short by Val telling the Thunderbolts to come upstairs because she's waiting for them. So the fight scene almost doesn't even get a chance to develop into something really cool. And I guess that's almost the point because of the next scene we're going to talk about. I give this one a 6 out of 10. The next fight scene I have deemed Thunderbolts versus Sentry. This is when the Thunderbolts meet Sentry, and it's the scene where they attempt to fight him. This is the first time that we like fully get to see Sentry's powers, I guess, even though he's not trying at all. And it's made very clear just how overpowered he is as a character. It's almost a comedic fight scene to watch the Thunderbolts constantly attempt to land a hit on Sentry and just nobody can touch him, and it just doesn't work at all. The choreography for the scene is pretty impressive. I think it showcases everyone's powers in a very unique way once again. I do still think I prefer the initial fight scene in the vault when they're all fighting each other, so this one gets an 8 out of 10 from me. The next sort of action scene, I guess I would call it, is when the Void attacks New York. When the Void fully takes over and causes a whole bunch of chaos on the streets of New York. Like I said, I kind of consider this more of an action scene because we get to see the Thunderbolts sort of spring into action and help save the citizens. I did really like this scene because I thought it was really great to get to see all these anti-heroes sort of get their hero moment. This scene even ends with all of the citizens on the street clapping for the Thunderbolts as they work together as a team, which I thought was really cute. And then of course this moment of happiness is short-lived because then the Void starts turning everybody into shadows and it's really scary, but I really do like this scene. I give it a 9 out of 10. Then sort of the last fight scene, and I'm using fight scene loosely here, is Bob versus the Void at the very, very end of the film, like within the Void. I guess this is sort of the climax of the film, in a way, if you will. Or I guess the whole climax of the film just sort of takes place within the Void, and then it's specifically when Bob starts to fight the Void, and specifically when Bob and the Thunderbolts come face to face with the Void. The other Thunderbolts get tied up, and they have to cheer Bob on as he struggles to fight the Void. Now, really all it is just Bob punching the Void over and over again, so it's not really much of a fight scene or an action scene, but I do think that when you're watching it, it does elicit similar emotions that a fight scene would elicit out of you, and you do definitely, without a doubt, find yourself cheering for Bob. Like, duh. But the reason I wanted to note this scene in particular is mainly because there's this really cool shot when Yelena breaks out of the restraints that are holding her up against the wall and she runs across the room to get to Bob. She does a whole bunch of like cool spy maneuvering flips and slides as like stuff is flying past her and the ceilings are collapsing, and I just think that it's very small, but I thought it was really cool. And I love seeing Black Widow characters move like Black Widows, so I just wanted to highlight that. I give it a 7 out of 10. So all of that, talking about the fight scenes and the action scenes, kind of takes me into my next segment that I want to talk about, which is the entertainment value of this film. If I were to combine all the things that we just talked about, the plot, the theming, the action, the fight scenes, I'd say this movie is very, very entertaining, 100%. It's actually pretty impressive, in my opinion, that the movie managed to tackle dark themes and topics while also maintaining a very entertaining and most of the time comedic tone. I do think this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. I think 95% of the entertainment value in this movie comes from the group of characters that they, for a lack of better words, have assembled to form this new team. I think Marvel took the perfect cast of characters that all definitely have a place in the MCU, but until now, it was kind of more of a slightly insignificant space, and they really gave them a chance to shine. I also found the general plot of this movie pretty entertaining, at least as entertaining as it needs to be. It can be pretty tricky when you're making a Marvel movie, and the sort of backbone of the movie relies on the audience being somewhat interested in MCU politics, but I do think that the movie did a good job with that. The political plotline of it all doesn't need to be the most entertaining part of the movie, which it isn't, but it needs to be entertaining enough that people are paying attention to it and they follow it enough so that the movie makes sense, which I think this movie does pretty well. Not to mention, I think Bob is a very entertaining and endearing character, and I think that this movie does a really good job of making us care about him so quick. And speaking of characters, that leads me into the last little segment that I want to talk about when it comes to reviewing this movie. The characters in this movie, and specifically the characters that are on the Thunderbolts team, are easily the heart and soul of this film. So I want to talk about sort of how each character is used. First, we've got Yelena. Yelena is easily the star of this movie, and that's no shocker to me at all. Florence Pugh is a remarkable actress, and Yelena is a leading lady worthy character, just like her sister would have been, okay? This movie takes its time with Yelena, like I mentioned, really diving into her mental state as she struggles with Natasha being dead, and she struggles with feeling like she doesn't have a purpose. Yelena starts off this movie by being super, super lonely. She throws herself into her work, and then when her work is done at the end of the day, she kind of just throws herself into alcohol to try and distract herself from how lonely she is. She seeks help in her father, Alexei, who we will talk about in a minute, and eventually, Yelena finds herself at Oxcorp, almost accepting death when she realizes that Valentina is going to set the place on fire. Like, she kind of just closes her eyes and accepts it. In this movie, a shocking but very sweet relationship is formed between Yelena and Bob. I didn't expect them to be tethered together in the way that they were, but I ended up loving them so much by the end of the movie. Their bond sort of begins at this Oxcorp facility where Yelena promises Bob that he can trust her, she's going to get him out of there, especially because at this point Yelena is under the impression that Bob is just a regular civilian. She has no idea that he has powers. Then later when the Thunderbolts meet Sentry, Yelena is like appalled at what Valentina has done to Bob. As the Thunderbolts move to attack Sentry, Yelena tries her best to stop everyone from fighting because the last thing she wants to do is hurt Bob or fight him. When Yelena steps into the void at the end of the movie, it's never really explicitly stated whether or not she was walking in there to go after Bob or if she was just going into the darkness to fully accept it. Personally, I think she was going in there to go after Bob. You guys can let me know what you think. But I think Yelena chooses to enter the void because she wants to go and save Bob, especially because that happens after she has a really beautiful moment on the street with Alexei, where Alexei essentially tells Yelena that he can see a light in her now, and that he thinks she has found her purpose with the Thunderbolts. Like, he can tell that there's a difference in her between the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie, and I agree. Now we can talk about Alexei, aka Red Guardian. Red Guardian is such an interesting character because for most of the time, he's sort of like a himbo, comedic relief, silly and stupid character in a way. But sometimes, especially and specifically with Yelena, he has these very tender and very fatherly moments with her that make his character so much more than just a silly little guy, you know? But like I mentioned, he does provide so much comedic relief in this movie, which I do think is definitely needed, and it's helpful because of the darker tones that are addressed in the film. Like, you need comedic relief from stuff like that. Little things like his limo service and his constant bit of being obsessed with Captain America are just nice little moments that always make me giggle personally. But the moment that Alexei has with Yelena on the streets right before the Void starts terrorizing New York is one of my favorite scenes in the film, just because of how moving and emotional both Alexei and Yelena are. I personally really liked the Black Widow movie, and I think one of the best parts of that movie was the relationship between Alexei and Yelena, and I am so glad that that dynamic carried over into this movie perfectly. They were beautiful. I loved them. Like I said, these two characters I think were definitely like the main emotional tether of this movie. Then we have Bob. Bob is a new character in the film, and he definitely had some of the most screen time, but I didn't really mind it. They made me care about Bob really early on. So they managed to make Bob a very likable and endearing character. Not to mention his relationship with Yelena that is established very early on definitely helped in getting me to care about him. Bob is clearly a guy with very big, very intense mental issues. He has a lot of inner demons that he's kind of constantly battling, which is why when you give someone like him the Sentry Serum, or whatever you want to call it, you end up creating a creature like the Void. It was so sad seeing Bob be manipulated by Valentina in this movie, and then it was just even more sad seeing what the darkness did to him. And then seeing what his darkness does to him in the Void was also sad. Like, I was sad for Bob. I think Lewis Pullman has the ability to act in such a way that just pulls on your heartstrings so well. I felt the exact same way about him when I watched Top Gun Maverick. So shout out to Bob, and I can't wait to see him more in the future of the MCU. Next, I want to talk about John Walker. Oh, John Walker. The complex and dislikable character that you are. I was almost worried, what with John Walker being in Thunderbolts, and then recently he was announced to be in Doomsday. I was worried that Marvel was going to attempt to make John Walker a likable character and kind of throw away everything that he did and we learned about him and the way that he was in The Falcon and Winter Soldier. And I'm very happy to announce that that is just absolutely not the case. They did not do that at all. They actually did something so interesting with John Walker's character in this movie where they made him dislikable in a way that is like humorous to the audience. And I think a big part of that is because of the characters that they surrounded John with in this movie. Like, for example, John as a character is always trying to prove himself. He still feels like he deserved to be Captain America, so he's constantly displaying like all of his military trained abilities and all of his military expertise and like his powers of observation or whatever. And that sort of irritating behavior is made enjoyable when you team him up with a character like Yelena, where she can go, "We get it, John, you were in the military." And also, like I just said, John Walker might be unlikable, but he is also very complex. You can hate him all you want, and you are totally valid in your hatred of him as a character. But to deny that he is an incredibly complex character, and arguably one of the more interesting parts of The Falcon and Winter Soldier, would be a lie. He is very, very complex. And I think that this movie did a good job at diving into his actions from The Falcon and Winter Soldier and how they have deeply affected his life after the fact. Somehow, Walker's dislikability is another source of comedic relief within this movie, which I think works really well within the dynamic of all of these characters. Next, we've got Ghost. Ghost is probably the most underutilized of the Thunderbolts cast, but I do think that her powers are very important to the dynamic of the group, and that's the main purpose that she serves. In a way, I think I'd equate Ghost to Hawkeye, kind of, in terms of comparing the old Avengers to the new Avengers. She may not talk a lot, but she is there. and she does what she needs to do when the team needs her to do it. And I feel like that's really the most that we can ask for from her character. As with other characters, I do think the movie could have done more with her, but she is the character in the Thunderbolts, I think, with like the least amount of screen time in the MCU prior to the Thunderbolts. So I don't really blame Marvel for not necessarily using her more than they did, if that makes sense. All right, buckle up, guys, because next we're talking about Bucky. All right, bear with me. I'm going to try to not talk your ear off about Bucky. Honestly, Bucky was used a lot less than I thought that they were going to use him in this movie. But also at the same time, I knew that the advertisement for this movie was using Bucky because they know that people love Bucky. Like, not to be too dramatic, but it was only after Sebastian Stan won his Golden Globe and became an Academy Award nominee, then Marvel started releasing a lot of Thunderbolts promo that had a whole lot of Bucky in it. It was only after that happened. So I kind of saw through that facade way back when, in like January, February. Like, they even had a Wheaties box. It's right behind me. They put out this poster, and at the bottom it says, "Now with more Bucky." And when that happened, I was like, what do you mean? The movie's already been edited. You're not going to add in Bucky scenes. So I knew they were using him for advertisement. I'm used to it. And I've been a Bucky fan for a long time now. So I'm used to the way that Bucky is treated by Marvel. And I could just tell they were using him for promo. I hate to say it. But don't get me wrong. Bucky is definitely in this movie. Like, I'd say he probably has like the fourth highest amount of screen time when it comes to the characters. He starts out the movie by being a congressman, and a lot of people questioned this character decision when Brave New World came out. But I actually have always been pretty interested in this choice with his character. I think the idea of Bucky wanting to help people in a way that doesn't involve fighting is very on brand for his character, especially at this point in his life. And I also had a pretty strong feeling that Bucky being a congressman wouldn't last very long after Thunderbolts. And I was right. He literally lasted less than half a term. There is a whole 10-minute long TikTok of me talking about Bucky being a congressman and my thoughts about it and why I think it makes sense to his character that you can go and watch if you want to hear me talk more about it. But I'll spare you for now because I know that this video is getting long. So in this movie, we see Bucky at a gala, which big shout out to the hair and makeup crew for the way that Bucky looked at this gala event. I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time. So shout out to hair and makeup. But at this gala event, he is talking to Mel, who is Valentina's assistant. And he kind of tries to like turn her on Val so they can get Val impeached. I think that this is a really good character moment for him. And I wanted to specifically shout out the line that he says at the end where he's talking to Mel and he goes, "You know about my past. I didn't have a choice in who I worked for, but you do." Like, that ate. Bucky also talks to another congressman about how the impeachment's going or something like that. And I also really liked this moment because it showed how Bucky is like trying to be normal and be a proper congressman or whatever, but he still has these little like spy/assassin techniques ingrained into him. Like, he finds a dead corner in this building where none of the cameras can reach them, which I thought was cute. The scene where Bucky takes out the convoy and the Thunderbolts is such a gag-worthy scene. I was like kicking my feet and giggling the whole time. I think that that's like a top 3 Bucky scene, I think, in all of the MCU. It's up there with the moment in Civil War when Bucky steals someone's motorcycle. Like, it's a great scene, truly. I think personally, I would have liked to see Bucky leading the team a little bit more than we did, or at least like co-leading the team with Yelena, which thankfully the second post-credit scene in this movie does kind of give us that. So we have that to look forward to. And like I mentioned, I would have loved at least one moment of diving into Bucky's past and his trauma, but instead, unfortunately, the movie kind of just writes it off in like a one-line joke, which sucked. So once again, the Falcon and Winter Soldier continues to be, in my opinion, the best character analysis when it comes to Bucky Barnes. So shout out to the Falcon and Winter Soldier. The Falcon and Winter Soldier, they can never make me hate you. Ever. Overall, I am very glad Bucky was in this movie, even though I wish they used him a little bit more than they did. And I hope Marvel at some point wakes up and realizes Bucky's potential before Sebastian Stan turns 50. They've got 8 years to figure it out, okay? Sebastian Stan cannot keep playing this character for forever, and I worry. I worry deeply. I do have to thank this movie, though, for giving me Bucky in a tux, Bucky in a suit, Bucky in a tank top, Bucky in a short sleeve shirt, and most importantly, for giving me back long-haired Bucky. I missed him deeply, and I'm so glad that he's home. Next, I'm going to talk about Valentina. I personally really like the addition of Valentina into the MCU as a character. She came in during the Falcon Winter Soldier. We've seen her in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and now she's in the Thunderbolts. I think with Nick Fury being virtually absent, it's important to have somebody like Valentina who can be a character that can sort of like show up in any project at any point in time. We do get a moment in this movie where we see a past moment of trauma for Val when she like sees her dad get shot in front of her as like a child. And I do feel like seeing her trauma wasn't entirely necessary in this movie, personally. Considering we aren't really supposed to like Valentina, and I don't think Marvel's gonna try and make us like her anytime soon. I don't know, I just didn't really see the point. Like, learning that her father got shot in front of her just didn't really seem necessary to me. Then we have Mel. Briefly, I want to talk about Mel because she's a small character in this movie. Like I mentioned earlier, Mel is Valentina's assistant who eventually calls Bucky for help when she thinks that Valentina is off the rails. I do think at the end of this movie, though, Mel still works for Val, so I'm curious where that's gonna go. But the reason I wanted to talk about Mel is because, similarly to how I feel about Valentina, I want Marvel to start investing in these characters that are like small side characters, but you could see them in varying different projects. Like, the best example for this is sort of how like Sharon Carter has operated throughout multiple Captain America movies and the Falcon Winter Soldier, right? So basically, like, I'd be interested in seeing Mel sort of become like a Happy Hogan in a way for Valentina, where she might show up in some random movie to talk to like Sam Wilson for Valentina or something like that. All right, that does it for all of my sections when it comes to me reviewing this movie. Now let's do a brief overview, and then I'll let you go because I've been filming this video for a hot minute. Overall, to summarize my thoughts on the Thunderbolts, I'd say I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I definitely see myself rewatching it a lot. I have tickets to go see it again on Thursday. I'm filming this on Wednesday, but you're probably watching this on a Friday. It doesn't matter. I plan to rewatch this movie a lot. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. I do think that it is irresponsible of me to review this movie without reminding people of my insane Bucky bias and the fact that I am incredibly more likely to enjoy any project that he is in. If you don't follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you might not fully be comprehending how obsessed with Bucky I truly am. I feel like I'm downplaying it for YouTube. You guys don't get it, but it is a very serious obsession. Ask anybody who knows me. It's very, very serious. However, I do think though, even if Bucky wasn't in this movie, I'd still like it just as much. I do think I enjoyed it more than Brave New World, and I do think that it is one of my favorite Marvel projects in a really long time. I love these characters. I love their dynamic. I love seeing them all work together, and I cannot wait to see them all in the future of the MCU. And I especially can't wait to see them specifically after the second post-credit scene, which I have thoughts on. I feel like that's another video for another time, but I do want to give another shout out to the way that Bucky looked in the post-credit scene, because holy shit, that's the best he's ever looked. Okay, but that does it for my review of Thunderbolts. Let me know what you guys think if you have seen the movie. Let me know what you guys think of me reviewing movies. I don't do it often. I think I talk more about TV shows mostly on my YouTube, but if you liked me reviewing this movie, let me know, and maybe I'll review Fantastic Four when that comes out. So yeah, comment down below what you thought of Thunderbolts. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. But that pretty much does it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.